the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to have with me Jeff Harrison. Jeff, welcome to the Florida Writer Podcast.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's good to be here.
Could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Yikes. So again, I'm Jeff Harrison. I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Lived in Florida all my life. I'm an English teacher at a private school here. And I just released my first novel, Thy Father's Glass, through Indigo River Press Publications just a few months ago in May, and I'm really excited about it. I also have a blog that I run called mixedandblended.com, where I write about my family and issues, because we are both mixed and blended. We are interracial and also a blended family. So I write about things that pertain to our family, and also about writing and stuff like that.
Well, Jeff, your blog sounds a little bit like mine would be. I just kind of would write about what's going on in my life, and it may be good, it may be challenging, but it helps when I can put it on paper and make sense of it. Plus, I often find that there's a lot of humor in even the crazy stuff.
We laugh a lot. Yes, we have an interesting family structure. I have 4 kids and 2 grandkids, and my youngest daughter is 8 months younger than my oldest granddaughter. So we have fun. It's blended. It's mixed.
That's definitely blended. I've heard it called a salad rather than blended.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah. Sometimes
so we keep our unique personalities as opposed to blending our personalities.
Absolutely.
So congratulations on publishing your first book.
Thank you so much. It's been a long haul, but it got out there.
And when did you start?
I started actually writing this book 4 years ago, actually. This is even before COVID. And I've been blessed with the summers off for teaching. So I try to maximize that time. And I spend most of the year while I might be writing short stories and whatnot, but I spend most of the year thinking of ideas and kind of funneling them, narrowing them. I got a big field of ideas for a novel, and then just kicking them out one by one, or some years I got 0 and I'm kind of pressed at the end. But I try to make sure I have something figured out and kind of plotted out for the summer so I can sit down and write it. And this year, my idea was to write a novella. And I had this idea of, as I've been leaning more towards magical realism, of the idea of the places where we live becoming part of the family, especially when you've had generations of people living there. And, what does your house see and what does your house feel about your family's history, and maybe even knows things that you don't know, or has seen things that you don't see. And so I wrote this novella, and originally I just had intended to enter it into some contests, but I wanted to have it properly edited first. So I had a student of mine, a former student of mine from 20 years ago. She's got an editing firm now called I Am Editing. And I had her edit it for me, and she liked it enough that she showed it to some people, and I was lucky enough to get in at this publisher. And they liked it. They wanted it at least twice as long, because again, it started off as a novella. So then I had the challenge with this story that I thought was done, to okay, so what subplots, who else is having, and I expanded it, and I was really happy. It was a real challenge, but I was really happy with the way that it turned out, and to learn so much about the business, especially through the process.
I'm very curious. You had to double the size.
Yes.
And expand, adding subplots and plots. I understand that. So I always like to think of, all right, I'm going to call it pizza dough. So if you're making a pizza, you start off with a little ball of dough, and you keep stretching it out and stretching it out and stretching it out. It becomes this giant flying saucer. right? And that's what we do with our works. So
Right.
is that what you did? You just sort of like kept stretching out the different parts, or did you actually add new
I,
characters or new scenarios?
you know what? That was what was really nice about the process. So I had to add some more dough to that pile, because if I kept stretching it and trying to like fling it around in the air, it was going to break in the middle at some point. And so one of the things that was remarkable about it is I had to take the characters that I had, especially the female characters, and I had to think about where they were coming from and what was their involvement. And so, for instance, in the original novella, it's really focused on this main character, Dane Schottmer, and his father. And his father was at different points in his life like very physically abusive, and then suddenly just kind of neglectful. Just he just kind of checked out. Um, and the novella was really focused on that. And the fact that Dane has a wife, was just kind of, part of his background. And so then in expanding it, I had to think about like, well, what is it about their relationship that contributes? And what is it about her specifically that she brings to this situation with him and his father? And, is she the type that's going to encourage him to reconcile? Is she the type that's going to be, like, listen, it's you and me, forget him. Like, why would you even want a relationship with him? He's made his bed. And not only that, but like, what are the tensions between them? Like, it occurred to me, and partly because of like some of the things that my wife and I have been through as well. It suddenly it occurred to me, like, why don't they have kids? Like, I just never, I wrote them without kids, but why don't they have kids? And it occurred to me, they just don't want them. But I also imagine that there's something about going through an experience like this with your father and like really earnestly wanting reconciliation with him and not being able to get it because he's got Alzheimer's. And then him declining in help and ultimately dying. Maybe there's something about that makes you want kids. And normally I think we would see, the wife wanting kids and the husband more reticent about it. And in this case, and that was honestly what it was with me and my wife. Like, we had to have talks about that. And so I flipped some of those talks so that Dane is the one who suddenly, like at 40, discovers, I think I want to have a child. And his wife is just, like, yeah, I'm not doing that. If you're expecting me to carry this baby, you're barking up the wrong tree, buddy.
Sounds interesting. So the house itself can tell its own story. Is that what I'm understanding with the magical realism?
Yes. So the idea is that the house has seen, not just Dane grow up, but his father grew up in this house. And, we for better or for worse, we tend to repeat the sins of our parents. And so when the characters are up in the attic, they're able to look through this window that overlooks like the whole neighborhood and see into the past. And a lot of times, maybe it hasn't always worked that way, like it hasn't always been switched on or whatever it is. Or maybe it's Branson, the father, who's doing this, like in desperation out of his, last bits of selfhood or intellect or whatever you want to call it, that's underneath getting buried by this Alzheimer's. There's a desperation in him to connect with his son. This is the way I see it. And so he's kind of activated the house. And there's a lot of things that he would probably want to explain to his son, but he can't. And so through the house, he's able to let his son see. And so the son has probably looked through that window hundreds of times growing up. But as his father's health is declining, he starts to realize that he's not seeing the right things. Like it might be, daytime out there when it's supposed to be nighttime, or in like the first time that it really happens to him, he thinks he's seeing his father out there just wandering around, and his dad's got Alzheimer's, like in the middle of the night wandering, by the street is one of the worst fears you could have. And it turns out it's his grandfather, and he just doesn't realize it. And when he realizes what's happening, he starts using it as a tool to to understand his father. I think at first he just wants to have ammunition, you know how we do sometimes, I want to see how bad you were. But he's not seeing what he wants to see. He's watching his father grow up. And, while his father is repeating the sins, that he grew up with, he had it a lot worse. He had it a lot worse. And I think sometimes what we don't understand is even when you see somebody being bad and doing bad things, sometimes it really is their dead level best. Sometimes it really is, a marked improvement. And as much as they might try to do better, it's just not in them to do it, and you have to take them where they are.
So you're writing in what's called magical realism or fabulism.
Right.
Are they interchangeable? I don't know the term fabulism.
I think fabulism is a new term on me as well. And so in an effort to be kind of sensitive and understanding, like one thing I've heard recently is that there is a cultural element to magical realism, since it kind of comes from South America and it comes from a lot of African American writers and whatnot. And so that if you're not hitting that cultural or social element, if there's not an element of social tension or social change involved, it's a little outside the tradition. And so some people want to call, while the style is very similar, if it doesn't have that element to it, they kind of want to call it fabulism. So it kind of rests, or sometimes it gets lumped in with like low fantasy, but it really is something very different, magical realism.
I'm not familiar with low fantasy. Obviously, it's not my genre.
Yeah, they'll talk about like how high fantasy is like Tolkien and whatnot, like really true fantasy. And then there's, and of course they invent these terms every day that you got to keep up with. But so low fantasy is like, well, it's not a whole different world and like elves and orcs and stuff like that, but it's a fairy tale reimagining or something like that, but I like you said, it's not your genre. Like, honestly, fantasy is not really my thing either. And I struggled for a while, I think, to find my niche. Like, what is it that I was writing like these really bad crime novels for a while that only a couple of people have ever read, because I thought like that's what sells. And if I want to sell, I got to write that. I tried to write like a YA novel, and that was really bad. I really started to realize that like when I feel best about my writing is when it has this magical element. Like if I could write like Toni Morrison, that would be like writer goals right there. Like she's probably the best at it. But I'm still working on it.
And so how did you make all the shifts to that particular genre?
I think it's an aspect of the way that you see the world. I think for the difference, one of the differences between magical realism and fantasy is part of the way that you see the world. And I think that people who write fantasy or people who read fantasy understand that it's all fantasy. They understand that it's all, made up. And so in order to write that, you have to get very involved with the rules of it. You have to create this whole other world. Like very often in fantasy, whether it's through the wardrobe or through a portal or through whatever, you're going to another world, right? This whole world. And so, like, for instance, when we talk about world building, there's a lot of world building involved with fantasy. And you have to imagine all the rules, like how does the magic work, and what can be done and what can't be done, and what does it cost, and all kinds of alchemic kind of things, where magical realism seems to come from a very different mindset. The magical realist writer or reader understands that the world that we have now is magical. It has magic in it. It is a supernatural world that we live in already. And you don't need to build a whole new world. And so, for instance, to bring up Tolkien, like if you think about Tolkien, he's got to build a whole Middle Earth. He's got to have all these different races and whatnot, and all these rules. And it requires a lot of imagination, a lot of patience and whatnot. Where you take say, for instance, Beloved by Toni Morrison. And it starts very simply that, 1, 2, 3 was spiteful. There's a baby ghost in the house and it's causing havoc. And nobody, like, people are annoyed by it and saddened by it, but nobody thinks that that's odd. Nobody says, wait a minute, where did this ghost come from? And what are the rules about ghosts? And how do you get rid of a ghost? And then, in a couple of chapters, Paul D enters the novel, and he's completely nonplussed by the fact that there's a ghost in his house. It doesn't seem strange to him. It's just part of the way that the world works. And how do you get rid of it? He loves this woman. He doesn't want her tormented by this ghost anymore. So what does he do? He just yells real loud, and he grabs a chair and swings it around like you would, trying to get anything out of your house, and it leaves for a while, and then it kind of comes back. But I think that's the trick to magical realism, is that, you have to start with the mindset that if it's ghosts you're writing about, the ghosts are real, and nobody's going to be amazed by the fact, and you're not going to go through a portal to a place where ghosts are, or whatever it is. I think with Marquez, it's, like little things like, butterflies following people, or, being able to speak to the dead, or whatnot, and it's, or like the short story, the man with the wings, just this guy with wings washes up onto a shore in this little town, and nobody seems to think that that's strange. They're just sad for him, and they want to take care of him, and you give him a proper burial, and that's it. I think that's the thing that's beautiful about magical realism, is that whether you start with that belief or not, it allows us to believe that these things are just real in our world, not through the wardrobe.
Well, Jeff Harrison, how can people find out more about you and about your latest book, which is Thy Father's Glass? Is that correct? Thy
Father's Glass, right, is available on Amazon and wherever good books are sold, I guess, in Kindle or in ebook and paperback, Kindle on Amazon, I guess. I also have the blog, mixedandblended.com, again, where I sometimes I'll post some of my stories that haven't quite made it to the big time, and sometimes thoughts about mixed and blended families, or every once in a while I'll write about teaching or about writing on there, at mixedandblended.com. I'm also on Twitter at mixedandblended, and what is it? Instagram at mixed_and_blended.
Fantastic. Jeff, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Yikes. All right, here we go. I'm ready.
Would you ever have a pet spider?
I would have a pet spider, and my daughter's in the room. She's giving me like ugly faces because they want pets. And I keep telling them, like, we can't have a dog. It's too small, and I'm not taking care of it, by the way. But a spider, we could probably get away with a spider. I mean, we live in Florida, so we got spiders in the house anyway. What's one more, really?
They're not taking up much room.
No. They're the good guys.
If someone handed you $10,000 and said you must redo one of the rooms in your house, which one would it be?
If I had to redo a room, it would be probably the bedroom, right? Because I'd want to be maximizing my comfort, plus my little writing, my little like 3 foot by 3 foot writing office nook is in there. So I'd want to do something with that. I think if you gave it to my wife, she's definitely going to redo the not just like the kitchen, but like the whole front room, because she's been trying to get us out of this condo for like a year and a half almost since we moved in there, and into something bigger. So she would want to do all the stuff that looks good on Zillow.
And Jeff, do you have a pair of go-to shoes?
I'm not super into shoes. You know how like some guys are, they got the boxes and pristine and all the Air Force ones and whatnot. But I have like on the one hand, my white Adidas sneakers with the black stripes and sometimes the shell top. I will always have a pair of that. Like as soon as I try to keep them so clean, and then I put the fat laces in them like I used to back in the day. And I try to keep them clean. And as soon as I get like spots on them that I can't get out, boom, I got to get another pair. That would be my go-to. Like if I had one pair of shoes because they go with everything. Like you can wear them with like a black or gray suit. You can wear them with jeans. You can wear them with some shorts or running gear. They're the multi-purpose shoe.
Well, they need to
I'm not getting
hire
any kickbacks by Adidas for that, but if they want to send me a pair, I'm not gonna say no.
Jeff Harrison, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me, Allison. I really appreciate it.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Allison out. Woo! We're all done. Jeff Harrison is a high school English teacher at a private school in South Florida, trying to squeeze writing time between work and spending time with his family, including his wife, 4 children, and 2 grandchildren. In what little spare time remains, he likes to train for triathlons and play open-world video games. He has published 1 novel titled Thy Father's Glass, released in May of 23. In addition, he has had short stories published in literary journals such as Everyday Fiction and Wilderness House Literary Review. For more information about Jeff, visit his author website at jeffrayharrison.com. JEFFRAY Harrison.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us at floridawriters.org. Until next time.